Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session, Atlanta Case Study, How Carceral Foundations and Corporations Enable Cop City. I just want to offer gratitude to everyone who has already come into the room, to the folks who will be in the room, and of course to our folks who are on Zoom and live streaming from home or wherever else you are right now. Thanks. Before we get started, I want to, intro our session again. I know that you all have been going through a couple of days now of really exciting, really intensive conversations, discussions, and maybe some tipsy happy hours. And so if this is on your schedule, I just appreciate you making time for us. And also want to share a little bit about what we plan to talk about today. Since 2021, organizers in Atlanta have been fighting to stop the construction of a $90 million police militarization facility on a farmer slave plantation in current watershed forest. Community members and organizations alike have expressed fears of escalating police violence and increased climate impacts as a result of the environmental degradation. But with the support of the Police Foundation and corporations, the city government ignored the 70% of community members who disavowed the project and instead voted to move forward with building Cop City. Yes, appropriate response. A diverse panel of leaders who we have here today will share lessons, history, and strategies for building and wielding the power of frontline communities of color in the face of philanthropic neglect, corporate whitewashing, and political repression. I also want to read a note from our conference organizers who have asked that we share with everyone here today that one, again, we thank you for being here, and that we just have a few reminders to keep in mind. Please stay masked while in conference spaces and not actively eating and drinking. The speakers today obviously are unmasked, but we will also be abiding by these rules when we are not speaking on this panel. And please keep the aisles and any marked accessibility spaces open and clear for folks that need them. So again, please stay masked and please keep out for those accessibility guidelines as we participate in this panel today. Cool. So I want to, again, welcome you all here. On the panel today, my name is Jill Cartwright. I use they and she pronouns. I'm based in Atlanta, and I have been for close to a decade, and love the South, love organizing, and have done so for most of the time that I've been here. And I deeply believe in organizing because organizing saves lives. And so in my roles in my community, as a leader in my community in Atlanta, and also with other folks that we're in solidarity with throughout the nation, I have been involved in the Cop City movement as an organizer, as an educator, and also in a role that's newer to me, which is a funder organizer. And I got into philanthropy because I understood that there are many ways, right, to get to freedom and to liberate ourselves. And we have to be able to counteract the oppressive forces that are keeping us from that goal. And so one of those systems that is often used for the wrong purposes but can be advanced in favor of our liberation is organizing money. And organizing the folks who have the power to turn over the wealth that was ours in the first place, to make sure that our movements are powerful, right? And that we can use the resources that are available to get us closer to this goal of liberation and free and fair democracy. Unfortunately, there are many folks who are standing on the other side of that, right? They don't have the courage or the political will to invest in the folks who know the solutions, know the strategies, right, that will get us to liberation, right? And a lot of those folks benefit and profit from being able to repress our right to First Amendment speech, our right to protest, to assemble, and to keep our communities safe. And so in my role and my work as a funder organizing, I'm working to disrupt those systems and to disrupt those patterns, right, of corporate greed that keep us repressed and that keep us from being able to strengthen our movements in the way that we desire and to be close to one another. I also have with me Tiffany Williams-Roberts, who is a dear friend of mine, someone I deeply admire, and who has been doing this work, y'all. Tiffany is also based in Atlanta. She'll say a little bit more about herself, but I feel like she won't say enough. So I'm gonna let y'all know that this is someone who is deeply embedded in our organizing landscape in Atlanta and in the nation, has been featured in Essence, in the New York Times, and so many mainstream media and publications for her sage wisdom and knowledge, specifically about criminal justice reform and what it will take from a legal perspective to support our movements. And so I'm really excited to have Tiffany with us today. I'm also excited to have Kyle Bibby with us today, who is Vice President at Color of Change and has been supporting their corporate campaigns and corporate accountability at Color of Change. I'm pretty sure everyone in this room should probably know about Color of Change. They are the largest online racial justice organization in the United States. And Kyle and the folks at Color of Change have also been involved with the Cop City movement from the beginning, bringing a perspective of being able to hold corporations accountable, and specifically the Atlanta Police Foundation accountable for what they have done to advance the Cop City project. And then finally, last but not least, we have Mariah Parker, who is joining us virtually. Unfortunately, she could not be in person today, even though that was the plan. But we're really glad to still have her virtually because she also has been a powerful voice in the Cop City movement, someone who many of you may have seen gone viral when she was sworn into the Athens County Commission, holding her hand on the autobiography of Assata Shakur, and also, of Malcolm X. And also is still an Atlanta activist now and is continuing to advocate online and in person against the Cop City project. So those are our speakers today. I'm really excited to bring folks on board. And I wanted to get us grounded. This is a number of things. You might have heard people online or in person if you've been to Atlanta saying that Cop City will never be built. This is not just a statement of solidarity. This is not just a demand. This is a rallying cry. This is a promise to the political elites and the Black and white forces and leaders who feed into the Atlanta way and have contributed to corrupt political action, that Cop City is not a project that is supported by the people of Atlanta. There is majority opposition to this project because of the environmental harms, the harms to the Black working class community that is directly involved, and to the people of this nation and this world. This project is has national implications, right? For our ability to participate in free and fair democratic processes, for our ability to hold the land and all of the creatures, the animals, the water, the forest, the trees, to hold them sacred and understand that we cannot live without them, and to understand that we need each other and that our community should have a right to self-determine what happens where we live. And so saying Cop City will never be built is an affirmation, it's a rallying cry, and it's a manifestation of a freer and fair future. So I just want everybody to take a moment with me to say Cop City will never be built.
Cop City will never be built.
One more time, Cop City will never be built.
Cop City will never be built.
Absolutely, y'all. So I've been talking a lot. I'm happy to do more of that. But I want to hand it over to my really brilliant co-speakers today, starting with Tiffany Williams-Roberts.
Good morning. Thank you for being here with us to talk about something that is really near and dear to those of us on stage, and I could tell some of you, even those of you who don't live in Atlanta. My name is Tiffany Roberts. As Jill said, I'm the Public Policy Director at the Southern Center for Human Rights, which is a nonprofit law firm committed to decriminalizing race and poverty through litigation, policy work, and community engagement. I come to you as a native of the city of Atlanta, as the daughter of someone who was born in Atlanta in 1935, the daughter of a political organizer who has seen the ebbs and flows of what happens when the Atlanta way has its way with the people. When you hear that phrase, the Atlanta way, What it means is the very, very close relationship between industry, right, white wealth, and black political elite class, the consolidation of power among those actors to ensure social control over populations that are marginalized. And that often means black people, especially brown people, poor people, queer folks, right, disabled people. And my work in Atlanta began long before I was at the Southern Center. I joined the Southern Center in 2018, but have been organizing around policing issues since around 2008 when I first became a public defender. Cop City has lived in the imagination of Atlanta's political elites for quite some time in one way or another. And when I say that, I mean that the Atlanta Police Foundation, which was founded, I think, in 2003, has been looking for ways to expand its footprint in the city of Atlanta through various measures. One of those measures is the acquisition of land. So in neighborhoods that are being gentrified, right, and we know that police forces are used to expedite gentrification of black communities, to take land that is already stolen away from indigenous black communities. The Atlanta Police Foundation will do things like put a community center in a neighborhood where children, teenagers can't even safely walk without being searched by police, right? But it is in anticipation of gentrification. With Cop City, before there was this proposition to put Cop City in the Woolani Forest, there was a proposition. What you see on the screen are images of a flyer from 2016 and a protest outside of City Hall where we were protesting the closure of the what we call the Peachtree and Pine homeless shelter, which was the largest barrier-free homeless shelter in the Southeast United States. The land was in Midtown Atlanta, and Mayor Kasim Reed made it his mission to shut down this shelter, right? At the time, they said that they needed the Peachtree and Pine shelter because they needed to build an anti-domestic terrorism police station. And so it was very early on that we were saying, why would we spend this money? Because we know that when street homelessness increases, so do quality of life arrests. So arrests based on people's poverty and the lack of resources. And so this is when we first saw this domestic terrorism tag being placed on something. Peachtree and Pine did close. There's nothing there. It will probably be sold to some commercial realtor at some time, right? The fight between the Atlanta Police Foundation even goes to when we wanted the Civilian Oversight Board to have subpoena power. That seems like a no-brainer. If a community member accuses a police officer of misconduct, you should have the authority to subpoena them to testify. Well, the Atlanta Police Foundation and the Atlanta Police Department and the union fought vehemently against subpoena power for the ACRB, but you would think that if we're interested in safety, safety means if I'm harmed, I'm able to tell my story and there's some redress, right? The Atlanta City Council at the time said, well, instead of subpoena power, we need to, have you heard this, restore the relationship between the community and police. There's been a breakdown. So why don't we have the Atlanta Police Foundation to do a ropes course with children in the English Avenue neighborhood where a grandmother had been gunned down by the Red Dog Unit in her bed, right? And so this idea that the Atlanta Police Foundation is a philanthropic organization is a flawed one. It is a corporation, right? It is consolidating wealth and power around the insulation of police and police forces from critique. And so at every step that we have had advances, so-called advances in the city of Atlanta as it pertains to the criminal legal system, the Atlanta Police Foundations and therefore their supporters have been on the other side of this. And so I know we'll talk more about it. I'm sorry, I turned away from the microphone. I know we'll talk more about it as the conversation goes on, but it's important to note that this framing of domestic terrorism from 2016, right, is now one of the reasons that we have the first ever use of domestic terrorism statute in the state of Georgia. The first time this statute has ever been used is right now against Cop City protesters and land defenders. So there is no disconnection. This is all one continuous thread of violence against Black, brown, and poor communities.
Yep, absolutely. Thanks so much, Tiffany. I want to pass it to Kyle to also give us an intro into the ways that corporations and carceral foundations have been really strong-arming this project through, and how we can create accountability.
Yeah, so thank you all for joining, and thank you for having me, Jill, and putting together this panel. So I am Senior Director over at Color of Change, running the corporate campaigns, and I am not from Atlanta. I'm actually from Jersey City, New Jersey. But, as it was stated earlier, there's rarely, I think, an issue that we come across that touches on so much of the broader movement space in terms of different issues that we're all dealing with, depending on what our specialty is. So for me and my team at Color of Change, we focus a lot on corporate accountability. And in this case, as it was stated earlier, so much of the resources that are going into Cop City are coming from private companies with almost no oversight, with no public accountability. And even when there are chances for public accountability, like the numerous city council meetings and other things, a lot of the elected officials have turned their back on the people. I've also spent a few years working on, just the connection between the militarization of the police. Before I was at Color of Change, I was actually at Common Defense, which some of my buddies right here up front, which is a progressive veterans organization, talks a lot about how the lines between, our military, we have a very well-known imperialist presence all around the world, right? And that is more often every single day becoming present in our homes, in our streets, in our communities. And that equipment that we see that was used overseas in these 20 years of unquestioned war is now being brought into places like Atlanta, but really across the entire country, and it's not being questioned there either. And the way in which this is being done is through these police foundations often. Mm-hmm. So I believe the Atlanta Police Foundation, who will serve as, the arbiters, they'll control this actual facility. They're contributing approximately, and granted, these are numbers that we've been able to, kind of reverse engineer from our researchers based off of financial audits here and there, because a lot of their financial documents are not privy to the public, but approximately $60 million from the Atlanta Police Foundation, initially 30 from the city, another 30 on top. So, we're talking a lot of money that could make massive changes within the city of Atlanta. But the thing that actually also sticks out for a lot of us at Color of Change and a lot of national organizations who have been focusing on this is that 40% of the use of that facility is not going to be for people in Georgia. This is going to be an international facility. We expect law enforcement, potentially military from across the country to pay into this facility. It is a money-making venture as well for the Atlanta Police Foundation. So when they say that the official name is the Atlanta Public Safety Facility, there's not very much public about it. These dollars that are made will end up going back to the foundation. It will not have the sort of accountability that the people in the community care about, and the board of the Atlanta Police Foundation is mostly full of corporate leaders from around Atlanta. So again, we are watching the erosion of what should be checks and balances and control measures for the community to make decisions about what goes on in their backyard. We're seeing that erode more and more, and it is becoming now, clear that the Atlanta Police Foundation and many of the police foundations across the country, they're avenues for the privatization of our local security and our public safety, which is unacceptable. I think we can all, we already have enough problems with elected officials and pay to play. This is just another avenue for that. Where the big donors can come in, give that money directly to the police via this facility, and not just the facility, the foundation itself, and have influence over public safety in that way. Very unaccountable. So I guess on there, that just is the general rundown. I will say the other aspect that I almost forgot, the police foundation and the police department, the level in which they operate very closely together is huge. In fact, I believe some of the actual administrative functions of the Atlanta Police Department are now actually being run, some of the operational aspects as well are being run actually by the Police Foundation. Certain programs that should be run by the police or would be initially started by the police department, the Atlanta Police Foundation now takes on and they run a good amount of that. Not necessarily the direct enforcement of the law, but more of the, some of the administrative programs. I can get into that a little later, but, so these lines are blurring and it comes at the expense of the community to be able to speak for itself and actually have a community that they would like. So, and excited to talk more about that.
Thanks so much, Kyle. That was awesome. I hope that y'all are getting just as pumped as I am about what's being said here, and I'm really excited to move into our collective conversation. But before we do, we're going to switch to Zoom and have Mariah Parker, who's also joining us, characterize the resistance that's happened in the past few years. This is a strong and growing movement. This movement is very much still alive, and Mariah is going to talk a little bit about some of the tactics and strategies that have been used, as well as the lessons that we've learned from resisting the building of Cop City.
Hi, everyone. Sorry I can't be there with you in person, but I'm glad that I could be here with this really badass panel to talk a little bit about what I have learned as a student of Cop City for many years and as a more active participant in the movement since I moved to Atlanta last year. First, just a little word on why this issue matters to me. I've been organizing through the framework of prison abolition since 2018, when I first started studying that framework and experienced a homicide in my family, and as a result, an incarcerated loved one, and having seen the ways that our criminal justice system can be re-traumatizing for victims and truly doesn't bring justice to a lot of folks that are survivors of community violence. And since then, been really focused on public health, focused solutions to public safety problems. First as a county commissioner in Athens-Clarke County from 2018 to 2022, and now as an active participant in base building, direct actions, communications, and the Stop Cop City vote campaign right now, trying to get the question of Cop City on the ballot in November. So as I've watched the Cop City movement grow since 2021, when the lease between the Atlanta Police Foundation and the Atlanta City Council was first being considered, back then, watching very closely as groups like Defund APD and Refund Communities were very involved in canvassing neighborhoods and holding town halls to bring people into the movement, essentially meeting everyday folks where they are at in terms of their civic consciousness, to bring them into formations to challenge the power of City Hall and challenge the power of the corporations that Kyle had been mentioning. A lot of the folks that were participant in this form of base building knew themselves that they didn't have the numbers to beat the Cop City lease at City Hall during that initial 2021 vote, but recognizing that for a lot of folks, this might be the first time they ever reach out to their city council person or attend a city, or call in to a city council meeting to make their voices heard. And so building those kinds of relationships through those traditional political channels was a really important way to begin growing the movement past those that were already on the side of divesting from policing, or already folks that were challenging police power. In 2021, those efforts led to 21 hours of public comment, 17 of which were against the lease that ultimately the City Council passed anyway. And then similarly, we saw again a fresh round of folks riding around the city on their bicycles, handing out flyers about the June 5th meeting where the City Council was set to approve the funding for Cop City. And again, I've heard a lot of people who, because of that outreach, because of being connected to that opportunity to come participate in a traditional political channel, folks got plugged into the movement for the first time, whereas before they may have been sitting on the sidelines sort of as observers. And so that community outreach and connecting folks to City Hall as a way to build out those community formations has been a really important part of the movement for several years. But one of the most, arguably most effective tactics for challenging the actual construction of the facility physically is forest occupation. You might be familiar with the term forest defenders, folks that actually physically are putting their bodies or have been putting their bodies on the line to occupy the Wilani Forest and delay the construction of the project. And tactic is really important for several reasons. First of all, going back to the history of the South River Forest and the particular site where they're trying to build Cop City, it's been a microcosm of settler colonialism and plantation capitalism since the 1800s, when the Muskogee Creek people were first removed from the land, and then from the 1920s to the 1990s, when the site was operated as a prison farm, where folks that were being incarcerated in Atlanta are actually being forced to work the land, which probably sounds like a very familiar scenario to folks in the audience, in terms of the relationships between policing, prisons, and the maintenance of chattel slavery. And so we're seeing those dynamics play out again today, and the fact that they're trying to turn this land with this history into a site for militarization of the police in order to keep working class and Black and brown folks in their place, though the face of chattel slavery may have shifted over the last couple decades and centuries. And so because of the history of this land, actually physically occupying the land also has a really important role in cultural organizing and building networks of community resilience and care, as well as political education. Up until March, folks had been meeting on this land to engage in food distribution, plant distribution, education around the ecology of the forest, and helping people see themselves as parts of nature. As people become disconnected from nature because of living in urban environments, or the fact that the site itself had been very neglected by the city for many years and become a site of illegal dumping and things like that. Actually reconnecting folks with the land so that they can understand its history, understand the networks of ecology that we are still a part of, even if we may feel at a distance living in a big city. And so, in addition to that political education piece about the taking place on the land, using this opportunity of being together on the land to build networks within our communities to get to know each other and exchange skills and build a sense of community resilience. Forest defenders also allegedly, engaged in scuffles with the police to push people off of the land. They were attempting to clear cut, bring in bulldozers and things like that. And that was a pretty effective tactic in delaying the construction of the site for about 2 years. In March, or as you all know, there was increasing escalation of police repression at the site, people who were arrested for domestic terrorism, for forest defense in December, the death of the police murder of Tortuguita in January, while they were defending the forest, sitting cross-legged in their tent, physically defending the forest. And so the tactics have shifted since then, but I really just want to uplift the fact that occupation, in the spirit of environmental and climate activism over the decades, where folks have physically chained themselves to the machinery, or even in the history of the civil rights movement, people occupying lunch counters as a way to register their resistance to injustice. We're seeing that replicated in certain ways today in the way that folks have defended the forest. I also want to talk a little bit about narrative struggle, given the fact that the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the paper of record for the state of Georgia and located here in Atlanta, is owned by Cox Media, and the CEO of Cox Media is one of the main fundraisers for the Atlanta Police Foundation, thus making it very hard for people in Georgia and Atlanta to get accurate and unbiased news about what's going on in City Hall and what's going on with Cop City. And so it's been very important for independent journalists to come forward and dig into city records, to do research on the corporations that are funding the project, in order to put information as a tool into the hands of the people to inform strategy. The Atlanta Community Press Collective has been a very major part of that work, watching a lot of these committee meetings and city council meetings to live tweet out and report on what is being said, what's being voted on, doing open records requests to get information about the site plans, the funding schemes, the schedule of development, so that folks can understand both what is happening and what isn't happening, though it is being said by the paper of record or official spokespeople from City Hall. Because there have been a lot of mistruths that have been repeated again and again and again by elected officials and other official stakeholders in the project. And so undermining their legitimacy through really, really incisive reporting, and again, letting people know what's going on so that they can do with that information what they see fit as agents of change in their communities. In addition to a lot of what I've described so far, Kyle spoke a little bit about the corporations, and Tiffany spoke about the Atlanta Way. And so, of course, going after capital directly has been a very powerful way of challenging the Atlanta Police Foundation, and especially the corporate funding that they received to make this project possible. And so, with that, there has been an effort on the part of Stop Cop City Solidarity, folks that have done research into the various capital stakeholders, whether that be contractors, corporations taking part, various folks that are financially implicated in the project, and putting the tools in the hand of the people through maps online where they can identify in their own community, no matter where they live, folks that have a stake in Cop City, so that they can put pressure on them as well to defect from the project and hopefully break apart the coalition that has made this project possible. And so we've seen direct actions against banks, Brasville Gorey, one of the main contractors on the project, Reeves Young, that actually, one of the contractors actually dropped out of the project last year, probably due to public pressure from people across the country. And so we're also seeing these forms of small distributed direct action in addition to mass disruption in form of like marches and protests. Groups of 3, 4, 5 people who are able to register their dissent in front of a bank in their own community in Minnesota, or here in Atlanta, disrupting a Atlanta Hawks game to let the CEO or owner of the Atlanta Hawks know that we won't stand for their participation in the Cop City project, going up in Norfolk Southern, who donated $100,000 to the Cop City project, and letting them know that they're on notice. And these other ways of trying to evade the police repression that we've seen become increasingly common as folks take mass action. As we saw at the South River Forest Music Festival in March, where there was a mass gathering of people that was very swiftly and brutally cracked down upon by the police. And so folks have been engaging in these small distributed direct actions to go after capital targets directly, which as police repression escalates has been increasingly important to keep people safe, but also keep that pressure up against the stakeholders that are making this project, getting this project off the ground. And in summary, I'll say the most important thing to characterize the resistance would be the diversity of tactics. That in the same way that folks are, trying to honor the ecosystems in the forest and the way that they are interconnected and the way that a variety of different species all depend on each other in order to keep and sustain life in the forest, that same sort of ethos is replicated in the movement itself, where people are engaging in the base building, the occupation and the disruption, the cultural organizing, the mutual aid, the narrative struggle, the direct action, seeing that if we're trying to break apart that coalition, that we need to come at it from every angle possible, honoring the collective genius of folks that are coming to the struggle from various different backgrounds, and wanting to give everyone who comes to the struggle an opportunity to engage, using the gifts that they have, using the knowledge that they have, in a very get in where you fit in kind of way. And so that's the best way to characterize what's going on. And ultimately, all of these different tactics have allowed the movement to flourish to the level where it is now, where, of course, I'd be remiss to mention, we are engaging in a referendum campaign to get the question of Cop City's lease on the ballot in November for the people of Atlanta to vote on. So it's kind of like a circular journey that we've been on tactically, where base building was really important at the beginning to get people out to City Hall initially to speak out against the lease. And now here we are again, base building in the community through this referendum effort to have people presented with a new opportunity to register their opinions on the project at the ballot box. Now, whether or not the referendum campaign is successful, we do have to collect 70,000 signatures of people registered to vote in the city of Atlanta. Since 2021, by August 14th. It's a pretty steep venture, but nonetheless, whether it's successful or not, creating this new avenue for, again, folks to get in where they fit in with engaging civically in a way that makes sense with the common civic consciousness, getting out and voting, signing a petition, canvassing in their neighborhoods is a way to build the base again, so that no matter if what happens with Cop City, we're able to continue to challenge the Atlanta way and challenge the rise of fascism in Atlanta in the future by strengthening those community formations. So folks are out at potlucks, people are out at coffee shops, people are out at the pool, people are out in their neighborhoods, people are out at hip hop shows, having all of these conversations about direct democracy, about police supremacy, literally meeting them physically where they're at, out in the streets, to bring them into the struggle, perhaps for the first time. And regardless how they feel about the project itself, normalizing the idea that the people themselves should have a vote and have a voice directly at the ballot box on issues like these, which in itself is another shift in the political consciousness. And so we're still out here doing that base building today. Direct action is still going on. People are still going after the Capitol that is behind the project. People are still engaging in the cultural organizing in recognition that we too are an ecosystem, much like the South River Forest.
Nothing else? Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Mariah, for getting us grounded in those tactics of resistance. I do want to get us into the conversation the rest of the conversation that we have planned today. But before I do, speaking of the referendum campaign, I also want to shout out Kamal, who walked in the back, who has been leading community movement builders and has been yes, you, has been a really powerful voice in this Cop City movement since the beginning. So just want to send gratitude to you for being there at every step, every level of engagement, from directly engaging in City Hall to engaging on the ground, organizing folks to town halls, doing on-the-ground canvassing, base building, the bread and butter organizing that gets us wins, to all the way to being one of the leaders and folks who are leading the referendum campaign. So much gratitude to you. And I wanted to start us out also with talking about essentially this erosion of democracy, right? We know, or we have known for a long time, that this system has been broken, right, or designed to operate in the way that it is. But we know that the way that system operates is not in the best interest of the majority of people, right, who live here and who are impacted by the issues. And so in this particular instance, I want to speak to Kyle and Tiffany about the specific mechanisms and the forces that are at play and the erosion of democracy, which we've seen through this Cop City movement, and through both the negative action and inaction from local and federal government over the last few years.
Kyle, do you want to start?
Okay, I can start. So, we spoke, obviously, about the police foundations, but, I want to encourage folks, no matter where you are, to look into the, legal apparatus and institutions that are built around the police foundations in your area. So I actually was introduced to my understanding of how police foundations work via work with the campaign we were running with the LA Police Foundation, because they were gifting robot dogs to Los Angeles. So, I mean, this idea that these are gifted, is what is this loophole that allows then for private actors, which again, in the Atlanta Police Foundation example we spoke about, the board being mostly corporate, these folks and these corporations, they donate the millions of dollars. Those dollars then go towards buying these things and it being gifts. They are not, routed through a normal appropriations process, which, there's already a lot of issues with that via things like asset forfeiture. New York City, aside, I worked briefly for city council in New York City as a staffer, and we were having conversations around the New York asset forfeiture, where they take the dollars from people on the street, and city council doesn't know how much, where the dollars end up being spent. It ends up being their own slush fund, right? So there's so many of these different instances where the police have built these institutions to support their ability to continue to arm and equip themselves to finance whatever project, in this case, again, Cop City, without community approval. And, I do think that in Atlanta, it's been, like I mentioned earlier, it's this medley of different issues that has really brought it to the forefront, because it's also destroying it's destroying a forest that people cherish. After a number of different very, terrible incidents that have occurred with the community and the police. So, yeah, I would encourage folks, especially, take a look at what's going on in terms of the police foundations, things like asset forfeiture, even the 1033 program. If you aren't familiar, that's a program that literally routes former military equipment from places like Iraq and Afghanistan. We're talking literally heavy armored trucks that were designed to withstand IED blasts and go into, heavy combat, situations. And now they're being handed off to the police, painted black, police on the side, serve and protect or whatever, and then they roll through our communities, right? So, and all of these are ways in which these police departments have moved much of their operations and their ability to get what they want outside of public view. And with, again, the approval, tacit or direct, from the corporations that fund these foundations. Additionally, we found out not too long ago, there was some press about it, but we have to connect the dots on these things. Governor Kemp signs, I think it was $75 million in tax rebates for folks who give donations to police foundations, right? So now $5,000 for an individual, $10,000 for a couple, right? So there is a massive incentive across, again, not just the police, but also, the politicians that, support almost exclusively the police via their municipal budgets at this point, to continue to make it so private dollars flow into the police, no accountability for the community, and, then next thing you know, robot dogs and mine-resistant, ambush-protected vehicles are showing up in our communities. So, and it really is a national thing. And international, because as I stated earlier, these foundations that own these facilities, they create these reimbursable accounts. So you could have theoretically, I spent 7 years in the Marines personally in my past life, and I trained once at an FBI law enforcement facility. We pay for that. The FBI makes money off of us, right? So same thing can happen with this, where you could potentially have, if they do not have the facilities available for military, they can be training at Cop City potentially. You can have law enforcement internationally, Israeli security forces, whoever, have the potential to be training now in what was a forest that was beloved to the community, right? So, and again, it's a model that's being replicated. It is everywhere, and it isn't just for things like Cop City. It is for a lot of this militarized equipment that they don't want us to really know that they have until they already have it. And, and then it's deployed, and then they figure out what the policy is after it already harms people, that sort of thing. So, yeah, I don't know, just.
Sure, thank you. So what I can add to that is the question of what governmental forces are at play that facilitate the consolidation of power by police foundations and police unions especially. I'll give you an example. This week, we got screenshots from the public safety that depicted the public safety chair of the Atlanta City Council, Dustin Hillis, telling neighborhood members on Facebook to call the police on canvassers for the Cop City petition, right, referendum petition. They said, we don't know what to do. They're in the park collecting signatures, and Hillis is like, you can call APD because it's my understanding that that's a private park that you all own, and gave the email address of a commanding officer in the Atlanta Police Department, and then the neighborhood person's response was, thanks, bud. Now, People in my community are not on a bud basis with members of Atlanta City Council. Neither do they feel that they have the authority to call the Atlanta City Council and say, thus and so is happening in my subdivision park, whether it's public or private. And so it is an explicit acknowledgement by Atlanta City Council and the Atlanta Police Department that their purpose is to protect certain property and certain people. The Atlanta Police Foundation's mission on their website says that the Atlanta Police Foundation employs a broad array of 21st century public safety initiatives to accomplish its mission. These initiatives include, and they go through all of these things, training to cultivate a mindset of true servanthood among the Atlanta Police Department sworn personnel. And at the end it says, our work is far from over. Through our public-private partnership model, we will continue to pursue, privately fund, and implement programming that creates a safe and just city for every citizen of Atlanta, driving out crime and enhancing the safety of our neighborhoods, right? And they're very explicit about using private a number of times in their work and in their literature. The message that they are sending is anything that City Council won't fund, they will. During the 2020 uprisings, there was a blue flu within APD. They stopped coming in because they were upset about the uprisings. And the Atlanta Police Foundation and Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms gave every Atlanta Police Department officer a $500 bonus to say sorry. When they published their op-ed about Cop City, they said it was going to be a morale booster for the police department, right? But all of this takes money, and it's never enough. The question I always ask these officials is, name a moment when you believe that the police were adequately funded, that it was enough. What is the goalpost? There is no goalpost, right? As long as police and policing are taking up the majority of funding, right, then we have to privately raise money for children to have laptops. We have to privately raise money. And corporations or foundations, if their dollars are supposed to be flowing to places where there is a gap, where there is a deficit, why on earth are their dollars flowing to policing, which receives the lion's share of most municipal budgets? In Democratic cities, in Republican and GOP cities, it doesn't matter because it is a nonpartisan issue that Black people, poor people, are to be controlled by police forces. The Atlanta police budget went up $12.6 million this year under Andre Dickens. $25 million budget allocation, still receiving most of the money that City Council allocates in its general fund, right? Mm-hmm. When will it be enough? It will never be enough. And what the Atlanta Police Foundation wants for everyone to understand is that they will continue to siphon money from worthy causes. Organizations like yours and mine have to scrape to put together a budget, to pay fair wages to people who believe in justice. And police get to have a $500 bonus because they are upset that people don't want their children slaughtered in the streets by police. Mm-hmm. And so the consolidation of money, the consolidation of capital is essential, and sometimes it's not because they know how they want to spend it. It is if they are hoarding it, we don't have it. Mm-hmm. And so that's why what Jill is doing is very important. That's why the funders who are now leaning into the work that we do in a deeper way, in a non-superficial way, not through DEI, but through funding the actual solutions that make us safer. Because when we're talking about 21st century policing, what is 21st century about a Black code? We just had a young lady die in our jail who was locked up on a property damage charge and a failure to appear. We have people in our jails who have died being held for criminal trespass, which in Atlanta was explicitly passed because of sit-ins. Mm-hmm. So there, all of these monikers and these tags that we put on cities and these officials who we allow to endorse harmful practices as reform. If it works in Atlanta, it will work everywhere because we are heralded as being progressive. Mm-hmm. So if it works in a place like Atlanta, the cradle of the civil rights movement, right? That means that cop cities can and will be built everywhere in this country and around the globe. And that is the most dangerous thing about what the Atlanta Police Foundation is doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm not even going to try to follow up what Tiffany has already said because she's really laid it out. But I do want to add that these are issues, this Cop City issue is one that has been built on for years. And what Tiffany is talking about is reallocating community resources that are taxpayer dollars that are held within the local government to the actual benefits that will actually support community health, well-being, and sustainability, right? Our communities have been calling for these kind of allocations for decades, and all we've gotten is incarceration, is policing, is more police. And police and incarceration and prisons cannot be the solution to everything. It is not the solution to everything. When we talk about the things that have the amount of money that has gone towards policing Atlanta is the #1 surveilled city in the country. Atlanta is #1 in the country per capita for the number of police cameras, APD cameras that exist in the city, and it has not made us safer. And when we say we're #1 in the country, we're #9 in the world. And the first 8 cities are in China. The first 8 cities that are most surveilled in the world are in China, and then there's Atlanta. And so we're really talking about the global implications of increased policing in a city that has Black leadership, in a city that has Black political elites, in a city that has Democratic leadership, right, who are using right-wing tactics that we've seen. Over the past 2 years, we've seen the prevalence and the imperviance of the big lie, right? This idea that elections are being rigged and that, the people who are getting these votes, we're getting them through corrupt practices. We're actually cheating to get the votes to be able to sway elections, right? And we've seen that same rhetoric perpetuated by Mayor Andre Dickens, which is hilarious to me because I'm like, the mayor has perpetuated so many lies over the past couple of years, right? From the killing of Tortuguita in the forest, saying that APD was not involved. And it's APD body cameras that show that APD knew that that killing was unjust and that they had messed up, or in their words, effed up, right? That was APD that actually was involved in that shooting. We saw the mayor when he was a council member. This came up for me yesterday because I was, along with Tiffany, was part of the task force that was commissioned by Mayor Keisha Bottoms to turn our city jail, which is called an extra jail because it's been sitting empty because of the organizing by local organizers to empty it and end cash bail. That jail has been empty. And we sat on a task force that was commissioned by Mayor Keisha Bottoms to turn that jail into something that was beneficial for the community, a community wellness center, right? And we got a promise for so many years that that city jail was going to be turned into a wellness center, and it continued to sit empty. And Mayor Dickens, when he was a council member, was one of the champions of that legislation. And one of the people, exactly, he
sponsored it.
He sponsored the legislation. And when he became mayor, all of a sudden the tables have turned. And he decides that he's gonna lease 700, I think it's 700 beds to Fulton County to be able to put Black people who are mostly booked by Atlanta Police Department back into the Atlanta City Detention Center, right? And so when we're talking about these issues, we're talking about money that has flown in places where we have been told that it will go to benefit the community, and it goes to these projects that are essentially playgrounds for the corporate and political elite. And we're talking about broken promises, not from the people, but from the people who are in power and who are so-called committed to lead us. I want to hold that for a moment.
Joe, could I add one thing? Because you mentioned the surveillance. Not only is that 1,000% true, the Atlanta Police Foundation helps to administer the city camera program. Yeah. So again, when we're talking about how much of the operational capacity is being handed over to the police foundation and is now being run privately, right, and the sort of implications that has, this is one of those perfect examples. The most surveilled city in America, Atlanta, and part of that program is being administered by a private organization.
And you can't get the information about those cameras through open records, and they just got an additional budget allocation for increased surveillance in the city. So it's a double-edged, right, because they're administering the project, and if I am a public defender and I know my guy was beat up by police and I want to know the location of all cameras on that corner, anything that's not administered publicly, I can't even get that information through open records. And so it also insulates them from transparency measures that would otherwise be effective if we didn't have this public-private partnership in Atlanta.
Exactly. And let's be clear, this is a money issue. I'm not just saying that because I work in philanthropy and try to organize philanthropy to actually hold to our role in advancing equity, right? But I'm saying that because these issues are made possible. These programs that are harming our communities are made possible through big money. Right? Money that is either ours and is being reappropriated, they're being transferred from public dollars to private interests and private playgrounds by our political elites, and money that is coming from the same corporations and companies who got their money from chattel slavery in the first place, right? Dating back to fossil fuel companies, right? Dating back to all these systems that are harming us and continuing to be perpetuated by that wealth. And so it's is a problem that we have to address, that we have to continue to fight by building people power, right? By organizing our people to fight money power in that way. And I wanted to make sure that we got a chance on the flip side of that to talk about the ways that we are building democracy and the ways that we are building that people power in Atlanta. Mariah, I know we haven't heard from you in a little while, so if we could switch to Zoom and give you an opportunity to talk a little bit more about the ways that that's being built in Atlanta and how we are organizing in solidarity. And then I'll open the floor to our other panelists to give closing words as well.
Yeah, I'll go real quick because I'd love to hear stuff from the audience / call to action so we know what to do after this panel. But, it's easy to focus on the way that democracy is being eroded when we think about democracy as the terrain of the state, that they control the elections, that we vote for people that then get into office. And the reality is that the democracy has always belonged to the people. And though we're seeing it eroded from the top, we are seeing it really robustly grown from the bottom right now in Atlanta. This looks like a couple of things. For one, just the way that the movement is very decentralized. It presents the opportunity for anyone to come and make their voice heard among the movement and to, jump in and be a part of strategy discussion, to be a part of formulating tactics and taking action directly themselves in a way that is empowering folks to be more civically engaged than if we just rely on state democracy. As well, I'd love to uplift that the democratization of information is a really powerful way to give people what they need to decide, what tactics make sense to them and what their participation should look like. And so having a really robust, independent journalist outfit to make that information that the city would like to conceal, that the Atlanta Police Foundation would like to conceal, bringing that to light so that people can make very informed decisions civically is a really important thing that is helping bring greater democracy to the city of Atlanta as well right now. Mm-hmm. So I know we're up against a lot. It sounds very daunting, but if you have a strong independent media ecosystem, if you have a lot of different ways for people to plug in a decentralized and horizontal fashion so that they can be a part of democracy in their community, then I think you can take on these corporations and I think you can win.
Yeah. I want to give closing thoughts to our panelists really quickly, and then also have time for, I think, 1 or 2 questions. I will just say that we aren't demanding the impossible. Everything that we are asking for has, one, been done before, right? Our communities have had sovereignty over our land and over ourselves before, both on Turtle Island and across the world. Our communities have been able to self-govern, and we have had alternate models of community safety that did not involve slave-catching police, right? We've done that before, and our communities have had access to living spaces that are healthy, environments that thrive, and forests that have been allowed to continue to give us the air that we breathe for centuries. And so nothing we're demanding is impossible. And I also want to say that the resources are there. The money is there, right? The resources are there for us to be able to accomplish these things. The Atlanta City Council, again, sorry y'all, I'm gonna keep coming at the mark because they deserve it. The Atlanta City Council last year got $5 million allocated for public housing, right? For affordable housing initiatives so that the city's a massive homeless problem could be eradicated, and they gave it back. They said, here, no thank you, thanks but no thanks, right? We're seeing those kinds of allocations happen, and we actually have an affordable housing trust in Atlanta that the Atlanta City Council and Mayor Dickens, again, has continued to defund, right, has continued to not invest the dollars through the bonds that they've initiated. They've continued to divest those dollars away from the Affordable Housing Trust. Or what they'll say is that we're going to pay for cop housing. Right. Regular people who are regular workers, right, and the people who are keeping Atlanta running, they don't deserve housing, but the cops do. We're going to put more cops in your neighborhood when that's never been what you've asked for, right? So we know the resources are there. They're being mismanaged. They're being misallocated. And it's going to take organizing and people power to make sure that our demands for our money continues to go where we want it to go. I'm going to give it to Tiffany and Kyle to close.
I'm sorry, I'm just thinking about what you said regarding the housing for the police. It just reminds me, I mentioned earlier, I was in the Marines for 7 years, and there's this interesting set of like things you get when you go and you're in the military, like when you become a part of this like imperial project. I got healthcare now, I got housing, they'll pay for school, the thing that nobody else can really get as long as you agree to be a part of this. Right? And we see similar, I think, where the denial of these things that we need just to survive and really prosper as people is kept from us unless you become a part of this project, right? So I don't know, it just always strikes me, right? Like how it is, it's really, there's a lot there, it's purposely driven often. But I will say one thing that was said earlier around the media narrative, I really want to really salute and just like, give praise to the folks who are on the ground in Atlanta doing this work, like literally out there putting themselves out into oftentimes dangerous situations. And I know from where I sit with my team, we're always thinking, what is the best thing that we can do to support those folks? And aside from, the actual direct campaign work of figuring out what's going on with these foundations, where's the money going, who's financing this, we really do have to take a very robust fight to this media narrative. All right, crime is down in Atlanta. You would not believe it. You would not believe it. Crime is down in Atlanta, okay? And quite frankly, even if crime was up, police don't solve crimes. They respond to crimes, okay? So we need to have conversations and framing from the media that really gets people to understand what are the real inputs for crime, right? And that's what I kind of pose to everyone here. We can have that anywhere. Right? And that's why we got so involved. And, we run there's another campaign that we run that is on challenging the media narrative. Back in 2020, every company on earth was standing by the racial justice movements and ready for, criminal justice reforms and all sorts of stuff. And I think it's there for a lot of people, but those corporations have moved on, right? It was what we always suspected it was. It was a PR strategy. It was an opportunity for them, right? But we have to, and same for how it was covered in the news. We have to, if we're going to be a real solidarity-based movement, right? And really the key of solidarity is that everybody has something to offer. We have to figure where we can plug in at the strategic level for that as well, because that is where it starts in people's minds. The belief that we need more police because it's so unsafe, when actually what you need is the violence interrupters, you need the mental health services, you need secure housing, right? And that is what's going to cause the crime to lower, and then you'll have less justification for now needing housing for police to justify the projects I talked about earlier, right? So I would say that, let's find a way to also challenge on the strategic level what is causing people to think that this is a solution to what's going on in our community, because it's not.
Mm-hmm. I know we are getting close to time, so I wanted to see if we had one quick question that we could take from the crowd before we wrap. Okay, I see one right here. Comes from the police? Yeah. You mean like ticketing and? Yeah, like that. How much money do they get from
Oh, I don't know right offhand what the fines and fees contribution is to the general funds, but I can say that the city of Atlanta was invited to join the Fines and Fees Justice a coalition out of San Francisco, which helps cities strategically decrease the fines leveraged against communities. We were part of that process, the grant-making process, and at the last minute, Mayor Dickens pulled the city's team out of the grant application process. We've also given back millions of dollars from our violence intervention office. So it does not constitute a significant portion of the city's budget, except for probably as it pertains to the municipal court. But the bigger picture is they look for things to justify the scope of the budget that they allocate to the Atlanta Police Foundation.
And then I saw one person raise their hand back there.
I was curious if you could say a little bit more about how the foundation administers the surveillance system, and if you could talk on that for like a second. And is there any measurability whatsoever of how you respond?
Yeah, so Atlanta Police Foundation, they directly paid for the surveillance camera system. It is a program of their foundation. And essentially those public-private partnerships, so they partner actually with a lot of local businesses, other stakeholder institutions like colleges and universities, to actually get those cameras on their property. So these cameras aren't just on public property, but they also partner with like the Atlanta University Center, which is a hub of Black colleges in Atlanta, to go have conversations, like offer some propaganda and say, hey, if you want your students to be safer, then we can give you these cameras. All you got to do is let us install them on your property, right? The same thing with local businesses. Hey, if you want to make sure that your business is safe and you don't have people, who could possibly bust your windows or try to like steal from you at night, then we'll give you, or we'll fund the installation of these cameras on your properties. And so a lot of the surveillance cameras that we see in Atlanta are implemented through these partnerships. And again, it's a matter of being able to educate communities about why this is actually harmful for the communities that exist near these stakeholder institutions, and also why it's important that something that's considered a public safety initiative should not be privately funded. I don't know if... All right. Thanks y'all so much. Thank you to the panelists, and thank you to the folks who supported us today.